Tech History Department. We're interviewing residents of the Kanawha Valley who have experienced firsthand different historical events that have happened in the past up to 60 or 70 years ago. This interview is with Mr. Price Williams, a longtime resident of Hansford, West Virginia, who is 79 years old and a retired teacher principal from Kanawha County Public Schools. Mr. Williams is also a World War I and World War II veteran. He was a second lieutenant in the First World War and retired after the Second World War with the rank of major. Mr. Williams, at the time of the 1912 strike, where was your home, or where were you living, sir?
My parents lived at Beckley, and I had taught one term of school up there, and I came to East Bank in the September of 1912 as assistant in the newly authorized Cabin Creek District High School. So my home for the next year, the next 9 months, was at East Bank. Now, as to the conditions on Paint Creek and the miners' living conditions and all of that, I know nothing about that firsthand. A lot of miners were living in East Bank. They had been organized for many years. The miners on the river and on the north side were organized, and all I know is what I heard them say, but much of that's a matter of record.
Were they organized into the UMW of A?
Oh, yes, along the river and the north side of the river, even up Kelly's Creek, I believe.
Well, was there a script being issued at the mines? Could this have been one of the problems with the miners?
Well, that was one of the complaints, but that's a matter of record, which your periodicals of the day can tell you more about than I would know.
Well, what about the socialism at the time, Mr. Williams?
Socialists, they were making great strides. Now, whether they were there before the mine workers came in, the mine workers, they came in after the mine workers, I don't know. The mine worker organizers and the socialist organizers seemed to be about the same thing. The Socialist Party made great headway. And they even claimed that in that fall of 1912, their candidate for sheriff, Doc Tincher from Eskdale, should have been elected if they'd had a fair count. But I believe it was 2 years later, after I'd left there, maybe in the election of 1914, that the Socialists did carry Cabin Creek District and elected, I better say, under the name of socialism, because a lot of them didn't even have any comprehension of what socialism really was. They elected the JPs and the Board of Education. 1914, I believe. I'm pretty sure it was. Now,
well, what was your opinion of the socialists, sir?
Oh, I was a socialist at heart, and still am. Otherwise, what else could a school teacher be, you know? Yes.
Well, these individuals, you said, who use the name of socialism, what would you call them if they weren't socialists? Radicals, agitators?
They thought they were socialists. They were just people against the prevailing system. They wanted to change, that was all. And let me see, Teddy Roosevelt as president, and later on Woodrow Wilson took so many of the good parts out of the socialist platform that it just emasculated the Socialist Party, and they went down a few years after that, because what was recognized as good and what was appealing to people mostly was taken over and adopted. Partly by Teddy Roosevelt and still more by Woodrow Wilson. And, oh my goodness, Franklin D. Roosevelt, his New Deal. Anyway, he put the country farther along than I'm sure than Eugene Debs ever dreamed of getting as a socialist.
Well, now on Paint Creek during 1912, I understand there was quite a bit of violence. I know that you didn't see this firsthand, but could you tell us what you heard about violence during the strike?
Well, I remember the night after the Bull Moose train had shot up the tents in Holly Grove, seeing men walking up the track through East Bank with rifles on their shoulder, and their jaws kind of set, and sour expressions on their face. They weren't talking to anybody, just marching along in groups of two or twos and threes, and supposed to be going up Paint Creek to take care of things.
What was this Bull Moose train, sir? Could you describe that for us?
Oh, it was a train with an armored baggage car. The baggage car lined with steel plate, and slits where the doors were. There were slits in the steel plate where the machine gun nose could be poked out through it, and it made trips from the head of Paint Creek to the main line of the C&O, down the main line of C&O to Cabin Creek, then up Cabin Creek, because the trouble was on Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, yes.
Who directed the building of this train? Do you have any idea? A coal company or someone like this?
Let me see. Wasn't the Baldwin Phelps men, weren't they in charge of that, employed by the coal operators? And the sheriff of Kanawha County, undoubtedly in with them. The C&O Railroad, the baggage car was armored. It was fixed up in the C&O shops at Huntington, so the railroad built it, but who directed it, I wouldn't know.
Do you know how many men were shot when they fired into the tents at Holly Grove?
Oh, I don't remember that, although I've heard some who were in the tents telling their big tales that seemed to be exaggerated at the time, but just how many or what, I don't remember. That's in the records.
These men that you saw marching silently and grimly, as you say, up the hollow, did they really take revenge for the deaths at Holly Grove?
Let me see. Yes, they must have, because there were bodies being brought in to the prior undertaking establishment there at East Bank, and whereas all winter, fall and winter, that'd been a kind of a loafing place. We could come and go freely. There were so many bodies brought in there that we just weren't free to come and go anymore, and the talk was that they were mine guards, and bodies brought in from shot up in the hills.
At the time of the strike, when you were teaching at East Bank, did you have many of the children of miners in school, or of mine company officials themselves who might have somehow seen a good bit of the strike?
The mines along the river were organized, so I suppose most of the children in the high school, walking distance, which could easily have been 3 or 4 miles in the high school, must have been the children of miners working, or else the children of people in the office of the mines. And those that came on the trains and spent a week down there in the dormitory on the school grounds, they might have, from up Paint and Cabin Creek, they're probably the children of office workers or the white-collar stuff. No, I don't remember any evidence of the children going to school being in want. It wasn't like today. Everybody didn't go to school then.
One of the most famous individuals in the strike was Mother Jones, who has a world, or I should say national at least, reputation for being interested in organizing labor. And I wonder if you had seen Mother Jones when she was here in the Valley and just how she impressed you.
I probably saw her many times, but I remember one time distinctly when she was speaking at a rally in Charleston, some place in between Lee Street and Quarrier, a transfer company's yards, either back at where Coyle and Richardson's or back at the Capitol Annex, Lake Kanawha Library, in a field or yard back there. She spoke from the bed of one of those big drays, and the only thing ladylike that I remember about her at that time was that she wore skirts.
Do you recall any of her speech? What type of language did she use?
Oh, I remember her saying, if some of you damn trifling women would get off of your, I don't know what it said. Anyhow, What do you imagine, she said? Get up and feed your husbands something decent to eat. Maybe they wouldn't drink so much gut whiskey. Oh, she was very free with her profanity.
I understand she was arrested during that strike. Do you remember why?
The Literary Digest of the time played it up as a 80-year-old woman arrested for stealing a machine gun from the Army of the state of West Virginia. But she was arrested under the authority of martial law, which I called martial anarchy. She was in the zone where they declared martial law and was agitating, was the common word at that time, agitating, stirring up people. So she was held in custody. Later, many years later, Dr. Hansford, who had one of the two-story buildings in Pratt, said she lived in his care there. She wasn't in the bullpen at the freight station at Hansford like the other prisoners were. And Dr. Hansford seemed to think she was a very nice person.
Now, this bullpen I have read some things about. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Oh, that was a very large freight station. If you want to see something that looks like it now, you might go to Marmette and look at the old freight station there. They had to get freight in to be hauled back away from the railroads, and they were pretty well constructed, just a great big, well, stronger than a barn. It was the freight depot just below where the Sheltering Arms Hospital was at Hansford.
This was an enclosed building? The men weren't out in the open?
Oh no, they weren't out in the open. It was well, typical freight house, the railroad freight house, or warehouse. And I think it was springtime anyhow. I think it was springtime.
And these were mostly miners who had been arrested by the militia who were put in the bullpen, or were there mine guards also?
Oh, I know there were no mine guards put in it. One was the editor of the Labor Star, I believe it's called the Socialist, Labor Star. The word socialist was in it. It was supposed to be a socialist labor paper of Huntington. Wyatt Thompson was one of them, and this flannel-mouthed John Brown was another one, and some of the most boisterous of the local people, one called Big John Sechrist, who just died a few years ago at Crown Hill. He was one of them. The principal outspoken ones, we'll say, they were called agitated at the time. And it just might be that anyone they found out after certain hours. Just don't remember. But there was the minutes of the investigating committee from the United States Senate. You have access to a copy of that?
There's a copy in the archives, yes.
Well, if you want to pour through all of that, you'll get information more accurate than I can give it to you.
Well, talking about the arrest, now I understand these men were arrested by the National Guard of West Virginia?
Yeah. Yes, oh yes.
Now, that can only be done under martial law. Was there martial law in effect at the time?
Martial law had been proclaimed shortly after the shooting up of Holly Grove. My recollection, I don't think you ought to depend too much on my recollection, because things were written down at the time would be likely to be more accurate. My recollection is that the miners began assembling and collecting to avenge the shooting up of Holly Grove, and the militia came out on a special train one evening, and at the lower end of Crown Hill, the train stopped and a squad got out and went around and looked in a culvert under the railroad track and found some dynamite. And seems to me that shortly after that, martial law was proclaimed. And from there on, it was Colonel George Wallace, or the Adjutant General, or mostly George Wallace of Huntington, who who was making the laws for this part of the region until this senatorial investigating committee began to move in. And then many had been sentenced to as much as 20 years in the penitentiary. Eugene Debs came in just the day that the men were released. All of those things caused them to be released. Well, by the way, there's another story told me by Wyatt Thompson, who was in the Kanawha County Jail. He was the editor of the Huntington Labor Star. I've forgotten just how long he was sentenced for, but Eugene Debs, wanting to get in on the publicity, you see, I think Eugene Debs was an honest man and meant what he said. But there was a good chance to get national publicity. He came in to help the laboring man. He came into Kanawha County and visited the men in the jail, and Wyatt Thompson was one of them. So just as soon as Debs left the jail, all these prisoners were turned loose. But Mr. Debs went from there over to the Capitol to meet the governor. And the governor was very affable and glad to meet him, glad to see you, Mr. Debs, and so on. Now what can I do for you, Mr. Debs? Well, Governor, I'd like to see our boys turned out of jail. Mr. Debs, that has been done. In fact, it had been done just as soon as Debs left the jail. Now what else, Mr. Debs? And as many of these things that Mr. Debs wanted, either they'd been anticipated or the governor promised to do them or explained to Debs' satisfaction, so that Mr. Debs left the Governor Hatfield, praising Governor Hatfield very highly.